We're going to transfer over the engine speed sensor from our old rear main seal to our new one. Small Allen head bolt. This happens to be a 5/32 bit, 1/4 inch ratchet. Just going to go ahead and break that free. Get this baby out of here. Then we can toss this old leaky ring finally. Just going to gently wipe off any old grime or dirt that was left behind. It's pretty grimy in this area, especially with the rear main seal and then just driving around. There's a lot of debris and dirt that was piled up in here, but no problem. We're going to go ahead and clean that up. I'm going to take our new seal and just gently position the sensor the same way that it came out, just like so. And then we're just going to very, very gently snug down this hex bolt into our new seal. Torque spec is anywhere from 3 to 5 Newton meters if you're trying to torque this down, but I highly suggest you don't do that and just very gently snug down the bolt. That's it. Another thing we can do while we have this here is one, take off the alignment tab that comes on the sensor, or I'm sorry, on the rear main seal. What we're looking here for is the opening on the ring to match exactly with the little dowel on top of the seal. Let me color this in with some blue so you can see what that looks like a little bit better. We're going to want to go ahead and set the seal flat up against a flat surface. There's a plastic guide in here that helps the rear main seal situate itself over the crank. We want to make sure that that is nice and flat. Sometimes they can move around from shipping and handling. So just press that down, make sure it's nice and flat, and the guide is sticking up on the interior side of the seal like so. That's going to be good to go. Next, we're going to take our rear main seal installing tool. We're going to head over to the vise. Second set of hands works nicely too. And the goal here is going to be to set the interior of the tool, which is going to be this piece right here, level with the face of the tool. So we'll take our calipers, we'll head over to the vise and just use this to line everything up nicely. And we're going to lock it in, or setting the height with this locking nut in the back. Once we have those two things situated, we'll go from there. So just to show you what we're talking about again, portion of this tool is this inner brown black piece. Right now it's sitting higher than the actual tool itself. So I have the nut locked in the vise. I'm just going to spin it until it starts leveling out. And then I'm just going to check my work using the flat edge of the caliper. All right. You can also feel that tool be nice and flush, or feel the inside of that tool to be nice and flush. Next, you'll see I painted it in blue, a little alignment dowel. That is what the dowel on the ring here is going to lock into. So you're going to want to set that so that both of those are locked. Again, try not to spin anything. You want to keep these two lined up just like it came from the factory. Once you have that set in place, there's 3 knobs on the back of the tool that are going to thread into the holes which we used on the old seal to drive the seal off. And that's going to help lock the seal into our installation tool. So just get the 3 of those started. All right. We're going to go ahead and put our separator plate back on. You could do this afterwards, more than likely. There's just a little tab here that sits behind the rear main seal. Instead of fighting it later, we're just going to go ahead and put this in now. Now we're going to grab our seal and tool. We're going to take this back nut and unwind it all the way to the end. When we push this up, that's going to push on the inside portion of the tool where we have 2 8mm hex bolts that are going to bolt into the crank itself. That's what's going to hold our tool into place. As you get this nice and close to the car, or to the engine, go ahead and plug in your wheel speed sensor, just so we don't forget that critical part later. And then gently line up the inner portion of the tool. Then you're going to grab your 2 M7 bolts and get those threaded into the bottom 2 holes. These are going to act as your guides for the tool. As you get this tool lined up, keep an eye on the guide, make sure it's sitting nice and even over the end of the crank before you start to snug down those 8mm bolts. Using an 8mm hex, we're just going to start threading these 2 bolts in by hand first. And we're just going to snug them up gently using the ratchet. These don't need to be cranked down to the max. They simply are there to help keep everything lined up. And because this is a diesel, we're going to be using the lower right pin and we're gonna push that in to help keep everything nice and aligned. Now that we have that in place, comes the actual part of driving the seal into the back of the block. We're gonna go ahead and snug up this nut by hand. You can go as far as you can by hand. And then we're gonna grab our torque wrench and snug this down to 35 Newton meters. Switching over to a deep socket. That way we know we're not gonna bottom out our shallow socket with the tool. And we're tightening this to 35 Newton meters. It's very important to be exact. Okay. It's totally okay if there's still a tiny bit of a gap between the block and the sealing flange. That's totally normal. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove these guide bolts. We're going to undo the 3 knobs that hold the tool to the seal. And now we can undo the 2 8mm hex bolts. These I'm just gonna quickly zap out in reverse. The installation guide will typically stay inside the tool here, but in this case it just popped out. No problem, no harm done there. There is a couple springs in here that kind of help keep everything from getting jammed up. So now at this point we have our seal installed. We have our alignment dowel and our mark lined up, which is exactly what we want. But what we need to check next is the depth of the ring in comparison to the end of the crank. So we want to make sure that it's about 0.5 millimeter in. Anything less than that, we want to tighten it up, put the tool back in and tighten it in about 1.5 Newton meter intervals. So set the tool to 36.5, measure again if it's still sitting out too far. So let's grab our caliper and show you exactly what we're talking about. So just to be a little bit more clear in what we're doing here is we're gonna set the base of our caliper on the crank, and then we're gonna measure how far out our caliper goes up to the, we'll call it the reluctor ring or the speed, engine speed wheel sensor ring, whatever you wanna call it. Needs to be about 0.5 millimeter. Anything less, again, we're gonna have to tighten it down a little bit more with the tool. So we're gonna set our tool here and see what we get. Obviously, there are much nicer calipers out in the world than what we're using today. Obviously, the better the tool, the nicer and easier time you're gonna have. There we go. We are at 0.54 millimeters. And what I was doing is looking at the base of the tool and making sure that I was sitting as flat as possible on the crank. It's very easy to get an improper measurement if you have it at a slight angle. So with this, we're totally happy. We're gonna be proceeding with the hardware install on the rear main. So let's get ready for that. We're gonna go ahead and install the 6 10mm bolts that hold the seal to the back of the block. This is gonna help drive the actual flange, the last minimal hairline if there's any gap still left between the block and the plate, which is totally normal. In addition to that, this is totally just me being me. Dealer's choice if you want to follow along at home, but this is a diesel. These love to shake and vibrate. So I'm going to do a little bit of medium strength thread locker on these bolts. It didn't have any, to be totally clear, when they came out, but because it was from the factory undisturbed, now we've disturbed everything. I feel a little bit more comfortable throwing these in with medium strength. We're not trying to make it so that this can't be serviced again in 100,000 miles. We're just trying to keep it there until then. So keep that in mind if you're gonna do the same thing at home. Now that we have these set by hand, we're gonna go ahead and tighten them in a crisscross pattern so that everything seats nice and evenly to 15 Newton meters. Not a whole lot. Set your torque wrench and let's rock and roll. Before I actually do the clickety clack, we're just gonna snug these down a little bit more by ratchet first, and then we'll give them the final torque. And just for insurance, we'll go ahead and mark these. That way we know we've already torqued them down. Should we get hit by the men in black and forget everything we've done today. Okay, all right. Our rear main seal is in. Next on our laundry list of things to do, and it feels good to be putting stuff back on for once, is gonna be to give a final wipe down of our sealing surface on the block and the oil pan. We're gonna set our oil pan up with some new adhesive and then get that up here and seal this baby back up. So we're just gonna give everything one wipe down with brake clean before we stick everything together. But for now, Follow me over to the workbench. We'll show you how to apply that sealant onto your oil pan. We'll go from there. All right, we've cleaned up our surface multiple times with brake clean. It's looking as good as we can get it for today. We have the block side of things cleaned up as well as these sit with the pan off. It's normal for oil to want to drip down the sides. Once you get the sealant on the pan, you want to get the pan onto the block within 5 minutes of applying the sealant. A few minutes just to help tack it up while you move over and get situated is fine. More than 5 minutes, you want to do it again. That's kind of the window for this adhesive here. We're going to go ahead and apply a bead all along the inside of the hardware holes. 3mm bead is what Volkswagen calls for. You can measure the tip if you'd like with a caliper and then cut it open. This is kind of what you get. It's not a whole lot. And if you were paying close attention to when we dropped the pan, there wasn't that much gasket material on it to begin with. A lot of it had been smushed into the inside of the pan or the outside of the block. So not a whole lot. Do as you wish. I'm just here to tell you what's up. All right, at this point, our bead is applied. This is a great time to get your second set of hands nearby. It's not gonna hurt to have them hold back the intercooler piping while you get this situated in place, and have them thread 1 or 2 of the 10mm bolts in place just to hold the pan so you're not smearing the sealant off of where it needs to be, and then we can go in and tighten all the hardware properly. So with that, let's head over, get this baby on. All right, now underneath the car, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna have Mike, our videographer, he's gonna help me hold these pipes back just so that they don't interfere with the oil pan as I go up. And if this moves around or falls around, not a problem, we can fix that later. I've given everything another wipe down with brake cleaner and a towel, so we should be good to rock and roll. I'm gonna give Mike 2 of the 10 mils. He's gonna start those by hand once I have it up in place, and then we're gonna go ahead and readjust, and we'll go show you how to torque them all down. Okay, now we have all 20 of the 10mm bolts in place. We're gonna go ahead and tighten them down to 15 Newton meters. Because we don't have a traditional gasket in here, there isn't a specific pattern that you need to follow to tighten this down. It's up to you if you wanna continue to do crisscross or go in a circle. Won't affect it. Just if you do crisscross, be sure to keep track of what hardware you've already tightened. Use a paint pen or a Sharpie and mark them as you go. All right, and with that, that is 20 10 mils torqued down to 15 Newton meters. Obviously, give this as much time as possible to set before you fill the engine back up with oil. That's gonna be the last thing we do on this car. But for now, at least our engine is all sealed up. We have our rear main seal in place, oil pan is in place. While I have you here, I just wanna go ahead and button up the front. We're gonna go ahead and put our timing cover back on, get that timing tool out of place, get our crank pulley and our belt back on. It'll just feel like that side's complete, and then we can go back over here and put in the flywheel and all that good stuff. So let's do that now. We're gonna pull out this locking tool so we don't forget that that's in there. We're gonna go ahead and reinstall our timing cover once more. We have the center section or middle and then the bottom. These overlap each other. You want to make sure that the middle section sits over the bottom like so. 5 10mm bolts. They had some thread locker on them from the factory. Be sure you apply a little bit to the hardware when they go back in. We're using the same medium strength that we've been using on everything. We're gonna insert the middle section and the lower section together. We might have to pull them apart and do the lower first and then the top. It doesn't really matter. Just be sure that they're overlapping correctly. Let's go ahead and get these in. All right, that's gonna look something like so. I'm gonna put the 2 10mm bolts that hold these 2 plates together first in by hand. These get torqued down to 10 Newton meters. We're just gonna snug these up gently using the electric ratchet. Now we can go ahead and install our crank pulley as well. That hardware also needs to be replaced. If you watched our timing belt video, you'll know that they are torque to yield bolts. So we have a new set of those as well. Also linked in the video description below. And these as well, we're gonna put a little bit of sealant on the threads, a little bit of thread locker. There's a little dowel on there that fits in to the pulley. This only goes on one way. Just gonna set that baby in place. Make sure it's seating nice and flush against the crank pulley. And we'll go ahead and get these started by hand. These M10s get torqued down to 10 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. So now that we have them bottomed in by hand, we're gonna go ahead and snug them down to the initial 10, and then we'll give them another 90-degree turn. There's the initial 10 on all four. If you need to, go ahead and make a little paint mark on your bolt, just so that you can keep track of how far you've turned it, but we're going for a quarter turn here, so not a whole lot. You should be able to do this without counter holding anything, but if you need to, again, an M14 or a 19 millimeter 12 point will hold that crank bolt down the middle. There we go. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and mark them down one more time. Using the old marks on the pulley, we'll mark the fresh hardware if we ever need to check back in the future. Before I lose you to these intercooler piping, let's get this belt back on. We're just gonna hang it over the alternator up top. Pretty straightforward. This is probably one of the easier belts and probably the easiest thing we've done on this whole DIY. We're gonna get that baby situated there. We have our 16 on our ratchet. Go ahead and release the Kraken. Now we'll release the tension on this tool. Lose the belt off of the alternator because that's what you want. Get that baby back up there. Make sure the belt is sitting in the actual grooves of the pulley, and that's good to rock and roll. All right, let's grab our T30 or extended T30 and let's get these babies situated. All right, let's move on to the ones on the side of the block. Okay, and then we have one more over to the right underneath our oil filter housing. Just make sure you get this hardware situated in its home first. They kind of self-align once you get them in the hole. Now, just so we can kind of get away from the passenger side of things, we're gonna go ahead and throw our intercooler hose back on, and then we'll put in the flywheel. I know you've been waiting, but we've come this far. Let's just, let's enjoy the time we have together. So let's get this baby situated and go from there. I'm gonna go ahead and get our hose situated. We're gonna feed it onto the pipe first and then the intercooler. We're gonna get that snug on there, and then we're gonna feed it over to our intercooler. There we go. You wanna listen for that satisfying click. That means that the clips have locked into the groove on the intercooler. Give it a couple pulls just to be sure, but not too aggressive or you're gonna damage the intercooler. Make sure that your hose is situated all the way in place, and then go ahead and tighten down your clamp. Okay, you've been patient enough. Let's grab the flywheel. Let's get that in there. Now we're gonna grab our new flywheel, feed that onto the back of the crank, line up the bolts for the hardware. It only goes on one way. And once you have those lined up, we can go ahead and get them started by hand. Make sure you are only using new M12 hardware for this. The new ones have a thread locker already applied on them from the factory, so you should be good to rock and roll there. These are also torque to yield bolts, so even if you were to clean up the old ones, you're not gonna get very far in using them. So play it safe, get the new hardware, and you're good to go. You can only go so far by hand once you start hitting the locker, the thread locker that is, so we'll use the ratchet just to get it in the rest of the way. Okay, we're just gonna use the electric ratchet to snug these in. It's not gonna be enough power to over torque them. Now we're gonna switch over to our torque wrench. We're gonna torque these to 60 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. Okay, and then we're gonna do the additional 90 degrees. And just like the other hardware, we're gonna go ahead and just mark everything with a dot so we have a reference point of how far we've turned the hardware. All right. We have one of the old bell housing bolts in here with a pry bar. That's gonna be our counter hold tool. And then we're gonna go ahead and rotate the remainder of the hardware, or all 6 of the M12s, to the 90 degrees. That's gonna be the remainder of the torque spec for this. With the 90 achieved on all our hardware, we're back to where we were, what feels like an eternity ago. We have all the big stuff situated that we came to take care of. Now we're gonna go ahead and grab our transmission, wheel that over, and start mating it back up to the block. So let's get to it. Now we get to put the transmission back on. So we're going to start raising it up. You want to be sure to match the angle of your block so that everything mates together nicely. Getting that shaft inside the pilot bearing is going to be the #1 goal here. And we also have 2 dowels, one on either side. One's right here, which you can see, and the other one's on the other side, which holds this backing plate in place. Want to make sure that the trans slides on nicely onto those as well. Then we'll get the hardware started by hand, gently snug it up, and then we'll go around and torque everything properly. Okay, that sounded satisfying. Dowel is in on the front side. Let's check the back side. Oh yeah, we got matage. All right, now we have the transmission mated up. We're gonna start feeding our hardware in by hand. We'll get everything that we can under here situated so that we can get rid of this transmission jack and raise everything back up into place. I'm just going off my little cardboard cheat sheet that I made myself and putting the hardware back in. We have a bunch of M10s and M12s. You really only go one way, but it does not hurt if you organize yourself. Just to give you a quick idea, this is what this looks like for me. I just numbered everything, put the old hardware and the new hardware together. Pretty easy and straightforward. While we're on the 18 mil socket, we're gonna go ahead and torque both of those two down. That's gonna allow us to secure this a bit better to the block. It's also going through the iron portion of the block, not the oil pan. So if something were a hair off, we're not gonna strip anything or crack anything. You definitely don't wanna use the hardware to join the two halves together. That's how you cause problems. In our case, we're just snug them up gently. So we're gonna grab our 18 millimeter socket and we're gonna torque down those two bolts to 80 Newton meters. All right, we have most of the bottom hardware in at least snugged up by hand, if not torqued down. That is enough to get this transmission jack out of the way. So we're gonna go ahead and remove that now so we can get to the two bottom 16 millimeter bolts, snug those up, and then we'll get above in the engine bay and work on the rest of the hardware up top. Now we can access the two bottom 16 millimeter bolts, and these get torqued down to 40 Newton meters. Just for the time being, the bottom we're gonna leave be. These are all snugged up. Let's get in the engine bay. Let's get the other bell housing bolts in. Then we can get this transmission mount back together so that we can get rid of that brace and go from there. All right, we're gonna start with the 18 mil sneaky bolt that lives behind our starter. That one got us earlier when it came time to drop the transmission, but not today, Satan. Okay. And we're going to switch over to the torque wrench, 80 Newton meters for these M12s. There we go. We're going to continue on with the next two upper bell housing bolts, which I have labeled 3 and 4 during this assembly. I can't see, but I can feel. Let's get that one in here. This is also an M12, and so will the next one. So these are both going to be 18 mil. 80 Newton meters. This is I think the only way you're really gonna get that 18 up there. This is a gear wrench 3/8 drive flex head, but you already knew that. We're gonna go ahead and hit these with the paint pen, which no one will ever see once we put the oil cooler in place, but we know, you and I know, that these are in here and that these are torqued down. That's all that matters. Now, before we put the mount back on and raise the trans up, I'm gonna take advantage of the dangle, if you will, and get the shifter situated, as we have to get back underneath it to get the two M10s in place. There was room before, but now it's hanging down nicely with plenty of room to spare. So let's get this clip off the end of the selector on the transmission and then get the clip back on. Okay. And then let's swing underneath and get those two M10s situated for the shifter bracket. Now we're going to feed the mount on the transmission side of things and the actual transmission. We have the new hardware. If you remember, the one with the stud is going to be closer to the front of the vehicle and the engine. That's going to be for the ground later on. We're just going to go ahead and rest this baby on top. Again, just remember this hardware is one-time use. They are torque to yield bolts, so be sure you get new ones. Also linked in the video description below. Available on fcpo.com. I know there's going to be quite a lot of hardware here, but if I'm missing something, drop me a comment. I'll be sure to personally get back to you profusely apologize and then tell you what part number that was. We're just gonna get these in by hand as far as they can go. Electric ratchet just to speed things up a little bit. Flex head torque wrench makes easy work of this. Torque these down to 40 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees, as seems to be the theme with all the hardware here today. Now let's work on our additional 90 degrees. Okay, that was easy. Now we're gonna go ahead and lift up the engine so that these two mounts can kiss, and then we can get those bolts in, getting this brace out of here. That's 60 Newton meters. Then we need to do our quarter turn still, which we're gonna switch over to the traditional ratchet for. So let me mark those up so we can have a good reference of our quarter turns, and then we'll do the additional 90 degrees. That's gonna secure our transmission mount back in. We're just gonna mark these with the paint pen, and now we can get this engine support bar out of the way. Now we're gonna go ahead and plug in our DSG harness back in while we still have the starter out. We have plenty of room to work with here. I'm just gonna slide that in, lock it into place. We have the connector that goes to the back of our starter. We also have a ground cable, which will go over here, which we're gonna sneak out of the way for now. And we have the ground strap that goes to the starter as well, heading over to the side. Don't forget, we also have our metal bracket here, which holds our harness in place. That one has a plastic tab on the bottom that just slides into place. And then we'll clean up the harness underneath once we get back under the car. But for now, let's grab that starter, bring that baby over. Okay, let me grab our ratchet and just snug up that 16 quickly, but gently. We're not gonna tighten it down with this. Just snugging it up. I'm gonna leave it loose. Let's crawl underneath now and get the bottom 16 started by hand as well. This one we're gonna just snug up by hand using the 16 millimeter wrench. It's a bit of a tight squeeze to get a torque wrench in there, unfortunately, just due to how much little room we have between the oil pan and the transmission. These 16s only get torqued down to 40 Newton meters, so not a whole lot, something you can easily replicate using the calibrated wrist. Okay, and then we'll hit it with the paint pen, just so we can keep an eye on it next time we get in here to service it. We can see if it has moved, which I highly doubt. While I have you here, we're gonna organize this wiring on the side of the DSG pan. This has a little rubber sleeve here that we're just gonna tuck this into, like so. This harness actually belongs in this little tab up here, which was probably off from even before. I don't recall if we messed with it originally, but at least we know it's going back together the right way. And this little vacuum line, this is from our intercooler upgrade. We're just gonna tuck that in there. All right, with our harness nice and situated on the side of the DSG, let's head back into the engine bay, button up the last 16 millimeter bolt for the starter, get our harness in, and then we can get the cooler back in. One more 16 up here. We're just gonna snug it up quickly. And we're gonna switch over to the torque wrench, torque it down to 40 Newton meters. That's what I like to hear. We can go ahead and mark it with the paint pen. I'm losing it. All right, now let's do the ground cable for the starter. Let's get this 13 millimeter nut started. Let's snug this baby up. Okay, just nice and snug is all we need. Let's get this cover slipped back over. It just kind of clips around the head of the 13 millimeter nut. There we go. Let's get our electrical connector situated. Make sure that red tab is unlocked still before you go to plug it back in. Push the connector on. Lock in that little red baby. Good to rock. Let's get that ground cable situated. Now, something I ran into is the old hardware, the top ground stud was a different size than the one on the new hardware. That can happen sometimes. Hardware can change over time. So just be mindful, you may need a different nut for the ground strap up here. So we're gonna go ahead and swap that baby out and get that snugged up. Now we have our ground situated. Let's go ahead and get this cooler in, and don't worry, we have not forgotten about our shifter cable back there. We will get to that in just a moment. But for now, let's get these plugs out of here, bring that baby over, get some new O-rings in here, and snug it up. Next, you want to make sure that your mating surfaces are free and clear of any debris. Get your new O-rings situated in there. Remember, you always want to replace these as they do get flat over time. And then we can sit our cooler back over. Be sure to install new hardware for this, as it is a torque to yield bolt on the cooler. I know, we've done quite a few of those today, but why are you surprised? It's the same deal for everything. So we have our new hardware. This one looks a little bit different than what we took out. The ones we took out had a larger square head, if you will. These are more mushroom-like. These are going to be an M8 versus the, I believe, M10s that we took out earlier. So just a little bit different, totally normal. Again, hardware can change over time, especially when manufacturers are always updating or changing designs. We're just going to snug these in by hand. Then we're going to take these M8s to 20 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. We're going to go ahead and mark these babies down. Now let's swing over our coolant lines, which we had tucked up here earlier, meaning that this upper radiator hose is still unclipped. Now that those are situated, we can clip our coolant line back in its home one more time. At this point, we have pretty much everything buttoned up here that we need. Obviously with the exception of our battery tray and all that good stuff, which we'll get to in just a moment. But for now, let's head back underneath the vehicle. We're gonna finalize that shifter cable. And I think we're gonna hop into some axles. Now that we have the subframe out, which probably could have done the axles after, we're gonna go ahead and take advantage of the room we have and get those in and then go from there. We have our two M10s, which we left in here during the disassembly stage. Now we're gonna go ahead and get our bracket in place. I'm gonna take our axle assembly, feed it into our hub first. Get that baby lined up, oh yeah. Then we get our opposite end. You may be noticing, Mike, this does not look like what I took out. And you would be correct, because Pat went ahead and bought a new axle, because perhaps that was his issue this whole time and not the flywheel, but that's irrelevant. We're just showing you how to do the DIY today. We're gonna get one of these bolts started in by hand, and then we'll go ahead and get the other 5 in, and then we'll show you how to torque them down. On the hub side of things, we're just gonna get the axle bolt loosely started, but we're not gonna tighten it down until everything is assembled later on. Now we're gonna take our M10 hardware and torque all of these down to 70 Newton meters. To keep this from spinning on us, I'm gonna go ahead and use this flathead screwdriver, feed it in the vanes of the disc, and just have it lock itself, or lock the disc from spinning in between the brake caliper. So we'll have to keep pulling it out as we go around, but I have a super long extension to stay away from the boot. Set to 70. And then we're just gonna paint mark them as we go. On the hub side of things, we just have the new bolt gently threaded in by hand. We're not gonna do anything with it yet until the subframe is back in place. But for now, I'm just gonna go ahead and blast through the driver's side, do the exact same thing, and then we're gonna bring our subframe over. All right, at this point, we have both of the axles in. Again, the outer axle bolt is just hand threaded in up until the thread locker, which it gets pretty tight. We're gonna save that for later. But now what we're gonna do is grab the subframe, put it back on our transmission jack, get that baby situated in place. We'll show you how to get that bolted up, our steering column, electronic power steering rack, all that good stuff. So let's get to it. All right, now we have our subframe back on our transmission jack. We're gonna go ahead and start feeding it up into place. We're gonna get the power steering, or the electric power steering, hooked up first. Then we can get our shield on, and then we'll snug it up the rest of the way, securing the harness as it fits into place against the subframe a little bit better. So with that, let's go ahead and get a little bit more up here. We'll get these plugged in, get the shield going, and go from there. We have this lower clip here for the harness that can go back into the steering rack now. The 10 mil we'll do a little bit later as the subframe goes up a bit more. But that one can go in now so we don't forget it. And what we're doing right now is just kind of guiding the steering shaft to go into the interior of the car so we can get those hooked up later on. You may have to fight your ball joint ends out of the way, either fight them or go ahead and start lining them up to help you line everything up.
One eternity later.
This is Mike from the future. Don't be like me and forget to install your shield after plugging in your power steering rack. So as soon as you plug that baby in and route your harness through the metal clip here, put the shield back on, 3 T30s, and then put your subframe up and your new one-time use hardware. So for now, give me a moment. I am gonna struggle through putting these 3 T30s back on real quick, and we'll pick it up with some more good subframe hardware. So again, this one's gonna be hard to see, but you're just gonna have to go by feel to get that 10 mil back in. If you need to, bring the subframe up a little bit more, so you're not putting any weird strain on the hardware or the harness. And then you can get that 10 mil bolt started back up. Feed this baby in here. Flex head ratchet is the move. Okay, that's nice and snugged up. Now we can feed the subframe up the rest of the way. So we have our subframe lined up pretty well, just using the marks I made in the old grime on the body of the car to line up our corners of the subframe, the control arm, bushings, all that good stuff. Now we have it pretty much where we want it. We're gonna start the hardware by hand. Make sure you're putting in new hardware as it is torque to yield, and then we'll snug those up, hook up the auxiliaries, and go from there. Starting with the rearward 18, these two on the back of either corner here are gonna be the black cam style looking bolts. So we're just gonna get these started by hand. All right, we have our subframe lined up exactly where we want it. A couple taps with the rubber mallet or a pry bar to get it aligned to your markings is what you're gonna need. Again, keep in mind a alignment is still gonna be necessary and recommended after doing this job. We're gonna go ahead and grab our 18 and just snug up all 6 bolts first, and then we're gonna torque them all down to 70 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees and or a quarter turn, which is why we advise that you replace all of them as they are one-time use. Now we're gonna feed our exhaust hanger bracket back on. So we obviously didn't mess with this one. The torque spec for this bolt is 100 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees if you're taking that one out. Our next one is gonna be our center bolt here. This middle bolt is a 16 mil as the forward one. This one gets torqued to 60 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. So there's our 60. And just like everything else, we'll just do our mark so we can see our quarter turn a little bit more clearly. And then the forward 16 gets torqued down to 40 Newton meters with an additional 90 degrees quarter turn. All right, while I have you down here, we're gonna button up a few more things. We're gonna get the sway bar situated with the end links, the tie rods, and the lower ball joints, and then we'll go from there. Now we're gonna reinstall our ball joint hardware. We have our 16 millimeter nuts. I opted to replace ours since we took them apart. We're just gonna snug them up gently using the electric ratchet. And then we're gonna torque them down to 60 Newton meters. With this situated, we're gonna work on the end link and tie rod end next. So let's get situated for that. Now we're gonna tackle the end links. Pat had some new Mila HD units in the car, so we're going to go ahead and throw those on for him now. Just because we've gone this far for Pat, what's another little bit of work for us, you know? Slide that baby through, 18 millimeter nut, start this by hand. These Milas use a 15, sometimes you can use a 16 millimeter counterhold wrench on the back side. So we have a thin wrench set that we're gonna use. We're gonna snug up the 18 using the electric wrench, and then we're gonna torque this down to 65 Newton meters. Same torque spec up at the strut if you're having to replace them or remove them and reinstall them. All right, with that situated, all we have left is the tie rod end before we can do the axle bolt. So let's do those now. Now we're gonna pop our tie rod end. You should be able to turn this around left and right until you can get that ball joint end to pop in. New hardware for this as well. This is also linked in the video description down below. Let's get this started by hand. We have our 18mm ratcheting wrench and our 5mm hex to kind of hold the ball joint end from spinning. We're just gonna snug this up and then we can put a torque wrench on it, just like we did with the end link. All right, we just gently snugged up the nut, 20 Newton meters, and then do our additional quarter turn. All right, while I have it here, we're gonna go ahead and torque down the axle nut next. And then we're just gonna blast through the same process on the driver's side. We'll pick it back up in a moment. The 24 12-point bolt gets torqued down to 70 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees or a quarter turn. We're gonna do the initial 70 now, and then we'll do our quarter turn right after. If you are worried about doing the last quarter turn, what is also recommended is once you have the initial 70 and you get your wheels back on, put the vehicle on the ground and then do your final 90 degrees. What I like to do is I just use a lug bolt and a flathead within the cooling fins of the disc to keep everything from spinning. Alternatively, you can have someone hop in the car and just step in the brakes to get that final torque value. Whatever you do though, do not put this back on the ground with that bolt loose or you will damage the wheel bearing and then you'll have to put a new wheel bearing. So just whatever you do, avoid that and you'll be good to go. We're gonna set our torque wrench to 70 Newton meters. Tighten this baby up. All right, there's our 70. And now we just need to do a quarter turn. So like everything else, we'll mark our bolt. And there we go. I like to mark the inside of the hub here just to show where that bolt ended up. It's not gonna be exact just because we can't get to the bottom of where that bolt's sitting, but something is better than nothing. With that, again, this is the point where you can kind of approach this differently. There's no specific right or wrong way to continue on from here. I think what we're gonna do is just throw on the fender liner, get our wheel on, and just forget about this side. We're gonna do the exact same thing on the driver's side. Then we're gonna pick it up with you in just a moment. I think we're gonna get the fan installed so we can just bottom up the underneath of the car and then head back up top. All right, we're gonna feed our fender well back in, starting with the bottom piece first for the front half. This one keys in underneath the rest of the plastic well. So we'll go ahead and get that in. We have two T25s on the bottom that go onto the bumper end of things, which will help hold it in place. And then we'll put the rest of the wheel well in. All we have left to do on this side is just throw on our wheel. We'll just gently snug it up to the hub so that it's nice and flat. We'll torque it down once it's on the ground again, but we're gonna throw that wheel on. We're gonna do the exact same thing on the driver's side. So all the torque specs, everything you just saw is gonna be identical. We'll blast through that quickly, and then we're gonna pick it up with the fan, the intercooler hose, so we can pretty much button up the hole underneath of the vehicle, and then just button up things up top. Catch you in a moment. Before we head up, like we said, we're just gonna throw our fan in now, so we can kind of get this bottom of the car situated. So again, we've done this from the underneath and the top side when it comes to the fan removal and install. It's doable from either side. I think down here is a little bit easier, but obviously if you're working on the floor, underneath may be a little bit tougher, so you may want to just go from above, which if you want to see how that is done, be sure to check out our timing belt and water pump video, which we did on this very car, and you can get a good glimpse at how we do that. All right, we just have it resting on the studs that our T30s go into. We're just going to gently snug it up using the electric ratchet. And while I have it here, we can plug in our electrical connector. Make sure that unlocking tab for the red one is unlocked before you go to feed this in. Okay, lock that baby in. Good to rock and roll. Let's do the T30 on the other side, and then we'll get this intercooler hose on. All right, let's get this intercooling hosing back on. Feed it onto our intake pipe. Yeah. And then make sure it clips on over there. Beautiful. Flathead screwdriver to snug this up. And now, if you still have it, is a great time to go ahead and throw on your skid plate. And with that, we'll catch you topside in just a moment. All right, back underneath the dash, we're gonna get our steering column hooked up the rest of the way. So this should go up a bit. Yes, just like we needed to. It's a bit telescoping. Go over here, bring it down gently. Just giving the column a little bit of a wiggle as we feed this baby on, making sure we are bottomed out. Once we have that in, we can take our bolt, 13 millimeter bolt, feed it back in. This gets torqued down to 30 Newton meters. There we go, 30 Newton meters. Then we can go ahead and put our protective cover back on. Okay, we have our rack and column connected once more. We have the protective cover installed. Full disclosure, we spent quite a bit of time on that. Getting it lined up perfectly is the key. As soon as you do, it's going to slip right on. Now that we have those two situated, let's head back into the engine bay. We're going to button up our timing cover, get that corner situated, and go from there. Up top, we are going to reinstall our upper timing cover, get this baby situated so we can button up the side. Making sure that our cover lines up nicely. 1, 2, third one is sitting under here, right above the motor mount going into the block. We're just going to reach underneath for this one. Get that baby locked in. All right, with those in, now we can start swinging all this fun stuff over. All right, scan ourselves organized here so we can get everything back together, making sure our coolant line is running properly on the underside and up here. I think we have everything kind of loosely in place where it needs to go. So what we're going to do first is get these two M10 situated up top above our motor mount before we button up any of the coolant lines or anything like that. And we can get this plastic clip. This rides on this tab right on top of our bracket like so, and it keeps the coolant lines in place. Fuel filter situated. We have a couple 10 millimeter bolts that help hold this in place, as well as some 10 millimeter nuts. Everything started. We have two 10 mils that live up top there that we also removed. We have an electrical connector down here that we can plug back in. We have two T25s that hold in our expansion tank, so let's do that one next. Plug in our expansion tank. Get your weather stripping situated back into place. All right, we are looking good on this side. For those of you that were paying close attention, we talked about how Pat wanted to do a coolant flush. So I'm just gonna take 2 minutes, 2 seconds for you. I'm gonna fill this baby back up with coolant. We can throw some oil back in the engine, and then we're gonna pick it up with buttoning up the battery tray and everything on the driver's side of the engine bay so that we can get this baby fired up and check for leaks. My coolant situated. Last thing to throw in here is the fill tube for the windshield washer fluid. Make sure that baby clips in all the way. Get the 10 mil started by hand. Nugged up gently. All right. At this point, if you followed along and did the rear main seal with the oil pan out, go ahead and fill your engine with oil. And then we're going to meet you in just a moment with the battery tray and the last bit of accoutrements before we can start this baby up. Battery tray is going to go back in. Get this baby snugged up in here. We have three 10 millimeter bolts that hold it into place. So let's get those started by hand first. And then we're just going to snug them up quickly using the electric ratchet with a 10 mil socket and an extension. All right, now let's get our battery over here. Make sure you pull it in as far over to the driver's side as you can. There's a little lip just like this that locks that on the inner side of the tray. Then we can get our hold down and pinch bolt, 13 millimeter bolt. Snug that baby down by hand, and then we'll use the electric ratchet. Same deal, just to give it a quick snug. Get this positive cable on just to get out of our way, but we'll keep the negative one off now. Before we get our air box in, let's not forget the two top bolts for the fan shroud assembly. So we're going to feed this one in by hand first. Get that baby started if possible. If not, we'll just go in with the T30 and the extension. All right, with those two situated, let's get our air box in. I'm gonna line up the rubber grommets. You have one between the battery and the air box here in the outer corner. You have another one that you have underneath this grate right here. And the other one's a little bit harder to see, but it's on the right-hand side of the air box in front of the fuse panel. It pretty much self-lines up once you get one of them in place. The other two follow along, so pretty straightforward. Get those in. and then give it a nice good push. And now we're in. Make sure that your feed tube back here is still hooked up. It's not bound up or anything like that. And then we can grab our feed portion, our air feed to our air box. Get this baby in now. Get this T25 started by hand. I'm just going to use the extension bit. Not too tight, it's just going into plastic. Nice and snug. Let's do the other side now. With that situated, we can get our elbow piece back in. So let's feed this baby in. Bottom half goes into the air box. Top half goes into the feed right up top. Just like so. Push that elbow in. Get this piece up top like so. Okay. And then we can put the cap back on. All right. Now let's get our air filter back in. All right, new filter going in, as that last one was pretty much at the end of its life. No sense in putting back a dirty filter. With that baby there, we can now grab the top of our air box lid. Let's get our clamp off. If you remember, we left the clamp on that at the beginning. Now let's get our T25 and snug up the top of the air box lid. Let's plug in our air sensor. We plug in our vacuum line. We can throw on our beauty cover once more. And then let's situate the battery terminals. We have our 10 mil socket. And believe it or not, my good people, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. Days? Weeks? I've lost track. Overall, a pretty big and involved job. Again, a second set of hands is going to make this a lot easier. Obviously, doing this on the lift is pretty straightforward. You can go up and down as many times as you want. However, you can do this in the driveway with some good jack stands and a free jack or trans jack. Just be mindful you need to be able to brace the motor again in order to get the transmission out. I highly recommend you do it with the subframe out. It makes life 10 times easier than having to fight the transmission with the subframe in place. And just as a friendly reminder, don't forget to torque your wheels. 17 millimeter lug bolt, 120 Newton meters. You've seen us do the deal. You got this, my good people. Let me know in the comments if you do it, how long it takes you, if you ran into anything or you found any tips or tricks that make this job a lot easier. But if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.